hello, and welcome or welcome back to the Wool Sea Knitting channel. My name is Rachel, I am your host, and I am a knitter based out of Ottawa, Canada, and this channel is my chatty outlet to talk all things knitting with occasional guest appearances by other crafts, including today. So I am at a good point in a lot of my projects to update you guys, and I'm full of invigoration for knitting and crafting, and I don't know, I want to talk about it. And that's the whole point of this podcast, so we're just going to do that today. I have some knitting, some spinning, and some sewing to show you, and I'm going to show them to you guys in that order with timestamps below, so if you want to skip spinning and go to sewing, you can, and usual stuff. But yeah, welcome. Thanks so much for being here. Oh, before we begin, I have come to you with a request. I have been in a big rut when it comes to media to consume while I am knitting. I can't seem to focus on any TV shows. Books have been very hit or miss for me, and I have found that I feel super out of the loop with our knitting community online. I, of course, am watching my old faithfuls that have been around for as long as I've been around on YouTube, but I see that there are so many new knitting and crafting channels, and I have no idea where to start. Because I know that you guys have a lot of the same taste in me, who are you watching? Who do you really recommend of people who are smaller and or newer? Because I would really like to feel more integrated again. So please let me know if you have any TV shows, any books, and especially any knitting or crafty in general content creators that you recommend, or let me know down below. I would be so grateful for your recommendations. Okay. Into the actual content. So when it comes to knitting, I only have one finished object today, and it is my Folklore socks, which is just a vanilla stockinette pair of socks done in a self-striping yarn, and it is the Folklore colorway by Laura of Tiny Human Knits, who does self-striping sock yarns and other stuff too, but I think her main endeavor is self-striping sock yarns. And this is Folklore because this is inspired by the limited edition collector's vinyl colors that the Folklore album by Taylor Swift came out on, I think, if I'm remembering that correctly. I like the album Folklore, but I just really, really love these colors. And so last year when Laura announced this, I immediately purchased a pair. And I'm really excited to have finally knit these up. I just love, love, love these moody colors. It feels still sort of autumnal to me, but without being the traditional reds, oranges, yellows, browns color story that we associate with autumn. I don't know, I like it a lot. I think it's really pretty, and I am a little bit desperate to also make a sweater in this striping pattern. However, that I don't think is going to happen anytime soon because I don't know where to get yarns that are all the same base and would play nicely together in these very particular colors. And I have so much yarn in stash, including a few sweater quantities that are higher up on the to knit list. But yeah, another thing about these is I actually ran out of yarn, which is, I think, the second time that's happened to me in my whole career of knitting socks. And I think it is because I accidentally cast on with a 2mm needle as opposed to my usual 2.25mm needle. But I only noticed about halfway through the rib of the first sock. So, knowing that the rib is going to be stretchy and not that big of a deal to have a slight difference in tension, I just increased in that first row after the rib to a 64 stitch circumference, which I thought would be more fitting for a 2mm needle and the tighter gauge that I was going to get. And I think the combination of smaller needles, tighter gauge, and more stitches than I normally use for socks meant that I ran out of that 50-gram main self-striping color. And you can see these are not identical. I didn't match them up. I finished the first sock and then immediately cast on with the tail that I had just finished for the main one, which is actually this one. And so this immediately picks up where that repeat ends. And so I was actually surprised to run out of the yarn because I had knit two other pairs of socks in Laura's 50-gram plus 20 gram mini amounts, and I had quite a bit left over of the other two. So I really think it's that difference in gauge and stitch count that kind of brought me a little bit over. I think, also knit these slightly taller because I just was so convinced that it wouldn't be an issue that I didn't do anything to mitigate that. And it is what it is. The good news is this 20 gram mini that I used for contrast in the heels, I had handy to finish off the second sock with. So if you look closely, you can see that this color is not this, but I think that if you're just looking at them, you're not going to notice that anything is amiss. So I'm actually really pleased with these. I think they're really pretty. They're still super comfortable and warm and dense, which is great for a cold weather sock. And you can see I have finished these socks, except for I have left these two tails at the toes to do, because weaving in tails at the toe of a sock is something that I still am not super confident in doing. I have yet to find a good place to weave these in where they feel both secure and also like they're not going to create a ridge that rubs against my toes when I do so. And with this, it's even a little bit trickier because the tail is one color. So if I'm going up and down the decrease line to shape that wedge toe, you're going to see that contrast color in the stripes that are different colors than the tail itself. And so if you guys have any recommendations for how to weave in tails at toes, I'd really appreciate it. I mean, in practice, it almost never actually bothers me. I don't feel it when I wear it, but it does bug me as I'm doing it. And it's super fiddly, and it's a task that I typically put off. And it's also why I often choose not to do a contrast toe. I find it super easy to weave in ends at heels. There's just so many places to put them along the pickup stitches, underneath the slipped stitch yarn backings of the heel. And in the cuff, again, it's super easy. You just, do the standard loop-de-loop shoot up of a wrong side knit column. But toes, I still haven't gotten a really good hold on, like, oh yes, this is a way where I can put this where this high friction item is going to have a super secure tail that is going to be non-irritating. But it was nice to finish up something that is absolutely just for me ahead of all of the gift knits that I'm about to show you, because I am in the throes of gift knitting season. I'm in the swampy middle of it all, where I have achieved a couple milestones in these projects, but the ends are not really in sight. I finished these about 3 weeks ago, so mid-November, and it was just really nice to get a win in and something for me right before full speed ahead into my gift knitting projects. Speaking of my gift knitting projects, I have 3 on the go right now, and I think we're going to start with my most exciting, which is my second storm sweater by Petiteknit that I'm knitting for my mother per her request. So this is what it looks like so far. Doop, 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 doop. As you can see, I have done the entire body, including the collar, and I have picked up and done a few rounds of one of the sleeves. I'm knitting this in the called for yarn, which is Double Sunday by Senna's Garn, and it's in one of the Petiteknit collaboration colorways, and it's color 2114 Banana. However, in person, this is a little bit more muted and pastel than it's showing up on camera, and I would describe this as a butter yellow, which is on purpose because my mother wanted a butter yellow sweater, and this was, in terms of yarn, I think our best bet. My mother has extraordinarily sensitive skin. This is a very high neck garment. I mean, it's the same sort of as this. Oh, this is my Lakes, by the way. This is the Lakes pullover by Ozetta. It is a longtime favorite of mine, and I knit this in Knit Picks Simply Wool Worsted. It's, again, the same type of drop shoulder, I folded over crew neck. So I wanted this to be something that was going to work and not be irritating on my mother's chest, shoulders, neck, etc. And the merino and the Senna's Garn Sunday or Double Sunday I thought would be a good fit. And she really wanted a butter yellow sweater, and they had that offering available. However, I bought all that they had at the yarn store that my mom and I went to in Toronto, where she lives, to pick it up together so she could choose in person and confirm the color and also confirm that it would be tolerable for her skin. And so I bought 7 balls of this at Knit-O-Matic in Toronto. Again, another longtime favorite of mine. in terms of yarn stores, and I was on the mailing list to be informed when they got more in stock. Then I posted my podcast talking about how I was going to make this project, and Tar of the Tar Knits came to my rescue and was like, watch out, I'm pretty sure that color was discontinued, but it is on sale at a couple places now, so you might want to snap it up. And none of the yarn stores in my city stocked this color anymore. And so that was a bit of a mad dash scramble to order the remaining amount to finish off the sleeves, because those 7 balls of yarn are pretty much just the whole body, and then the bit of the collar that you can see is done in the yellow. And so I ended up getting the rest from the Knitting Loft. It's a completely different dye lot. They were so good on the phone. I called them and I said, hi, would you please let me know what dye lot you have for this? And the woman ran down to their storage area and was just reading the dye lots of different balls of yarn, which was so kind and such excellent customer service. And so nowhere had the same dye lot as this. But the thing is in this sort of drop shoulder construction, it matters minimally, because the shoulder is a natural visual break or stopping point. And especially since this design has these garter ridges at the beginning of each shoulder and separating these blocks, that visually, if it is 2/4 of a shade different, I really don't think anyone's going to notice. And it doesn't change the overall effect of the sweater. If anything, it might add to it, because I feel very differently and very nervous when knitting like a top down in the round raglan or circular yoke sweater, where if you end up starting a different dye lot ball at the shoulder, it is around here as opposed to the visual line of the raglan, which is here. And then it's super stark, super obvious. But this is the exact kind of design where that doesn't really matter. No one's going to be able to tell. And just looking at them side by side, the 2 different dye lots, I can't really tell a difference. So I think it's going to be okay. But Knitting Loft to the rescue. Yeah, so the reason why my mom chose this sweater is because I have one. She tried it on. She liked the fit. I already had the pattern, which saved me like $12. And it made it a lot easier for me to knit this for someone where I don't have access to that person to continually try stuff on, because she said, I want it exactly like yours, just a little bit longer and in a different color and in a softer yarn, which made it a little bit easier because gift knitting is quite stressful. Every year I tell myself I'm not going to take on that much. And then every year, November and December are consumed by stress knitting to meet different holiday deadlines. And it's just, this was a little bit easier. That said, this is still a super time-consuming project, even though I've done this already. I easily have 40 hours in this sweater. This is the second size, which I knit for myself, and my mom and I are both, if you follow the size guide, the 3rd size. However, we're both quite petite, and sometimes very baggy, oversized things just tend to swallow us. So I sized down for this, and in mine as well. And I think that worked better for my frame. I almost never knit a pattern in the yarn that it was designed for or the sample was knit in, and it's been really fun and reassuring to just do that. I know that the gauge is going to work out. I know that the definition is going to be lovely, and I do think that these two suit each other quite well. I think it's really beautiful texture. It pops without being too much, and it has a very nice feel at this gauge, and I don't know, that's just been a satisfying aspect of this project. One thing that has not been satisfying is I made a mistake pretty early on and then didn't catch it until way later, and I want to know if you guys can see where it is. Could you spot it? I feel a little bit like Dora, like, can you see it? It's here. On the top right-hand shoulder, there is a row where the 2x2 broken rib is all offset by 1 stitch. I was doing shaping and I think I was knitting in the dark while watching TV. I messed it up and I didn't notice until I had finished both shoulders, the entire front panel, and connected it in the round during this block down here, which means like 2 weeks of almost exclusively knitting this later. and having this been the first shoulder. So to fix it, I would have had to undo all of like this entire block, the entire front panel, and then also the shoulder before I got back to where I made that mistake. And so I have decided, due to time constraints, the fact that it's not in an obvious place, and also because her hair is going to be covering it, that I'm not going to go back and fix it. It is not a very obvious error. Everyone I've asked in person to be like, hey, can you see where the mistake is? They can't see it. And I just genuinely don't have the time, or at this point, quite frankly, the inclination to go back and do something about it. I might try and duplicate stitch over it, but I think the fact that it's just a bit more of a 3D texture with the purl stitches means it's still going to look weird if I try and do that. And I also don't know how to duplicate stitch a purl stitch. I don't know if that's even really a thing. So my mother is just going to have a nice little signature that she can point to and say, as proof that my daughter knit this sweater for me, look at this row of stitches that she did slightly differently to prove it to all of you naysayers. And that's the thing about making stuff by hand and making your own clothes, or making clothes for other people, or asking people to make you clothes, is you kind of then can't get upset when they look handmade. Another thing about this is you have, I'm sure, all noticed that the top of this collar is in a completely different yarn, and it's in the color blue. So I have also sensitive skin around my neck, and I have found it to be much easier to simply knit the inside of any folded collar in a different, softer yarn than it is to have to wear a crew neck that sits exactly right. And so you can see that I did that here. This is some like scrap cashmere I received as a sample. And I've done that in a couple sweaters, and I did that for the Lakes, actually this exact pullover that I knit for my brother last year. And so my mother wanted that as well. And so I've gone with this blue here. This is the FIBRE Co. Road to China Light. It's a mostly alpaca yarn with some cashmere, some yak, some camel, and some silk in it as well. It is incredibly soft. It's at about a sport weight, so a bit thinner than the double Sunday, which is a bit of a thicker DK. And when I'm done, I'm going to fold that down and sew it in place with the yellow yarn, or like this. And you might be able to see at the back of her neck if her hair is up, like it kind of peeking out, but really it's just so that, again, limiting the chances of irritation for my mother. I recommend that if anybody else likes a crew or mock neck and knitting sweaters in rustic wools, but also has a sensitive neck. So that is my storm sweater so far. I am really hoping to push and finish the first sleeve by the end of this week. I think I can do that. This is pretty much the only thing I have been knitting since I started it about a month ago. I work on this pretty much all the time. I have taken a couple days break to sew and to spin, but if I'm at home or knitting with friends, it's this project. And I would like to finish it because I'm worried about all my gift knits and the deadlines. I just don't have as much time to knit as I used to when I was a student. And so the gift knits deadlines are feeling a little bit more pressing this year. And I think that I could finish this sleeve in a week, finish the second sleeve a week later, and be sitting just a little bit more comfortably and less stressfully for Christmas. My second whip and gift knit is a pair of socks that I'm knitting for my brother. He usually asks for socks. He likes knit socks. I'm happy to make them for him since I know he wears them. And he asked for burgundy socks this year. I'm knitting them 2 at a time, and they're currently a tangled mess because I've started the heel on one of them. So this is what they look like so far. This is a 72 stitch circumference 3x1 ribbed sock, knit in Artful Belle sock yarn in the color Cabernet, which I feel is a burgundy. I was a little bit salty to use this as a gift knit for my brother because I received this yarn as a gift a few years ago, and I have been hoarding it, waiting to make something really nice out of it. But he asked for burgundy. I had it in stash. I have been wanting to knit stuff in stash, but then this has been kind of the year of gift knitting for me. But when I set that intention, I didn't realize how many of those gifts would be knit using yarns that I either purchased or someone gave me to then knit the thing for them and then give back, which is fine, but it means that I have achieved very little difference in the amount of yarn that I started the year with, and then I have continued to buy yarn but not use a lot of it. And so this felt like a really great way to save some money, use some yarn, get it out of my house, and make it into a gift that the person actually asked for, which is just a large series of wins for me and one of the things I like most about gift knitting. So this is just a pretty standard ribbed sock, and I'm doing the heels in this sort of charcoaly color to just extend how far this 100 grams of burgundy yarn is going to go. And I'm knitting these 2 at a time so that they can be exactly identical, and so that once it's done, it's just simply done. However, that means that my progress is just a lot slower, and that has me feeling a little bit antsy that I'm not getting these done enough, especially since these are my distracted or on the go socks. I knit these while I'm commuting. I knit these in the office at lunch when I'm chatting with my coworkers, and I knit these for the occasional work from home Teams calls that I'm on. And even though I have knit a bunch, when you knit quite a few stitches, when you consider the fact that this is a 72 stitch circumference and that I've done the legs for both, it doesn't feel like a lot of progress. And I have looming the part where I have so many stitches on the needles for both, where I do the gusset decreases. So I am slightly concerned about finishing these in time. I think that what I'm going to do is just take a little bit of time off from the storm sweater and try and finish the heel flaps of both of these so that I can just achieve a milestone in this project. And even if that's kind of an artificial feeling, because I still have a lot of sock left to do, it will reassure me enough to continue splitting my time equitably between these 2 projects. I feel I have been keeping pace pretty evenly between these 2 things in terms of matching the equivalent of getting to the heel and finishing it, getting to the body and finishing it for both of these projects. But as a result, it means I've done a lot without feeling like I've finished anything for a while, and that plus deadlines I feel like is kind of a bad combination. So I'm trying to boost my morale and my productivity by finishing a couple things specifically, like powering through and getting the body rib and the collar done on the storm sweater, and also getting the heels done on my brother's socks. And then I think I will be sitting very pretty and feeling very smug all of a sudden in about a week's time. And last but not least is the cardigan I am knitting for my grandfather. And I say cardigan, however, what you're about to see is just a small strip of fabric. Ta-da! So this will grow up to be the fundamental top-down men's cardigan by Jen Hagen. And I'm making this in Briggs and Little Regal in the color brown, which is, you know what, it's better to just show you the swatch, which is a really rich, dark, chocolatey brown color. And Briggs and Little, if you are unfamiliar, is a Canadian yarn mill and manufacturer. It's the longest continuously running family-owned mill in all of Canada. They're based in the Maritimes, which is our Atlantic coast, in a province called New Brunswick, and they produce 100% Canadian wool yarns that are very, very warm and a little bit scratchy. I want to make a sweater out of this so badly. It's on my sort of long list of knitting projects. And so it's been really fun to make something for my grandfather out of this. My mother, my brother, and I get our very sensitive skin from her father, which is the grandfather I'm making this for. And he really wanted a wool cardigan. My grandfather is someone who very much appreciates the merits of wool and knitting, which is part of the reason why I am so happy to knit for him. He is a great, very appreciative audience. So I said, would this work for you? And he said, I will always be wearing a shirt under my cardigan, so I would like the Canadian wool, yes please. Another thing about Briggs & Little is it's relatively affordable compared to a lot of other wool yarns that we have access to in Canada, especially with the currency conversion rate between the US and here and Europe and Britain and here. So I got a bunch of this and have knit my swatch and continued. Another thing about Briggs & Little Regal specifically is that it's technically a DK weight yarn. However, it is known to knit up quite well at closer to a worsted weight gauge. So it's, I think, meant to be somewhere between a 20 and 22 stitch gauge for a really warm, really solid Canadian winter appropriate garment. But it's still, because it's very woolly and very rustic, it blooms nicely at an 18 stitch gauge as well. And so in the interest of saving myself some time, I swatched on a 5mm needle instead of the suggested 4 or 4.5. I got 18.5 stitches in 4 inches, and so I have gone ahead with that gauge for this cardigan. The reason why I chose this cardigan, the fundamental top-down men's cardigan, is because this pattern is written for 4 different gauges, which I really like. You can make this on anything from a sport to an errand. And I also appreciated that this had a large size range that included the size that I need for my grandfather, which is a 56-inch circumference. So I am knitting the size below the one that would fit my grandfather using the 20 stitch gauge because my gauge is bigger, in the interest of, again, saving some time, saving some stitches. And because he's always going to be wearing this indoors, my grandfather doesn't really go out much. And also with a long sleeve underneath, I know that this will still be plenty warm. And it is still really a nice fabric, so I am enjoying doing this. I hope that he likes this color. He said that he wanted a neutral. Itchy Rachel. My friend Charlotte was kind enough to pick this up for me from the local yarn store that stocks it, which is Wool Time here in Ottawa, because it's really hard to get to from where I live via public transit. And I was visiting my father anyway, but she was going, so she sent me a couple of photos of the yarn that they had while she was there. I went with the brown. I'm very happy. And this is also a requested gift knit. However, as you could probably just infer based on the amount I've gotten done on this versus the other two, this is number 3 on my list because it's the biggest, and if I focused on this, I wouldn't get either of the other two done in time. So I'm going for quantity here. And number 2 is my grandfather has a winter birthday, and so if I don't get this done in time for the holidays when I see him, I can just continue working on it during the holiday season where I have a little bit of time off from work, and then give this to him a couple weeks later for his wintertime birthday, and he would still be able to get a lot of wear out of it. He is aware of this plan, and I think it's going to be totally fine. So those are the gift knitting whips. Into the whips for me, all of whom have been basically just on hiatus. It's going to be a while before any of these see some action, but they have seen some action since the last time we spoke, so I feel like it's still worth showing you. I am very close to completing the body of my Howell's Moving Castle cardigan. This is where it is so far. I must confess, it has been a little bit nice to use gift knitting as an excuse to put this one on ice because I am very unsure about where to end the body of this cardigan. Visually, I would prefer to end this colorwork intarsia section on the same row as I started it, which is with the pink diamonds at their widest part and the blue ones at their narrowest, so it looks like this. I think that that would be the best for down here. However, I also want about a 2.5 or 3 inch rib band at the bottom. That's about like 6 to 8 centimeters. And I think that the combination of those two things will make this cardigan too long. But I think I'm still going to try. However, I am quite hesitant about this plan, and so it's been good to just not work on it and not think about it while I do other stuff. The reason why I'm still going to continue is right now when I put this, functionally a vest on, it's quite long. I know that when I pick up for stitches and start knitting, it's going to just kind of lift it up a little bit, and that is what I'm hoping is my saving grace in getting the cardigan fit that I want. I want this to be long, I want this to be big, I want this to be oversized, but there is such a thing as too long, in my opinion, and I would like to avoid that. Another thing that's happening is I am about to run out of the blue yarn if I go ahead with my plan to also knit the sleeves in blue. So right now the whole back panel is in blue, and I'm going to knit the bottom body rib in blue. And I have enough for all of that. I'm also pretty sure I have enough to do the double knit button band in mostly blue, which is also my plan, but I don't have enough to knit the sleeves, especially considering I'm working with about 3 different dye lots of blue yarns, which is, again, my own fault, but you know, that is what it is. And I can't combine them without having very obvious color blocks on the sleeves of mismatched dye lots. I'm knitting this in Senna's Garn Pure Gint, by the way. The blue is Blue Heather and the pink is Old Pink. The pink is discontinued, the blue I think is still available, but I haven't checked in a while. So I have been considering knitting the sleeves in pink instead, which is more in line with the original cartoon inspiration that I'm going off, which is the character Howl from Howl's Moving Castle. However, it's not what I really wanted, and I'm wondering, am I going to enjoy it less if it's in pink? I don't think so, but I'm struggling to let go of my vision. The other thing is I like using all the yarn that I have, and I still have so much pink. And I have pink in pretty much all the same dye lot, which would make knitting the sleeves in it a lot easier, and it would eliminate yarn from stash because I really overestimated the amount of contrast I would need for these. These triangles used so little yarn. In hindsight, I really think I could have gotten away with 2 balls. And I would have a lot left over anyway. I just would have had to separate it into different bobbins. But as it stands right now, I have so much pink and so little blue that the economical and environmentally friendly thing to do would just be to knit the sleeve in pink. And yet I think I still want the blue. But I also love this color of pink. I think it would still suit me. It's not like it's going to change the wearability of this cardigan. It's already half pink in the front, and it's closer to the animated character's outfit. But the point isn't to match this animated character, it was to create a garment that I really liked based on this movie that I love and a fun outfit in it. I have been using gift knitting as an excuse to avoid making any real decisions on that. However, I did procure button options for this cardigan. So, okay, it's rolling a lot because it's stockinette, but this is roughly what it looks like. And I got these buttons as one option, which are celluloid buttons that are quite wide in a very light pink that I think would go very nicely in a blue button band with blue sleeves. They are ever so slightly bigger than I think would nicely fit on this cardigan, but maybe I could file them down. Is that sacrilegious when it comes to vintage buttons? The back of this says that they're from the 1930s. I don't know if that's true, but they were only $5 at the Ottawa Valley Weavers and Spinners Guild sale and exhibition, and I thought they were too good an option to pass up. And then as a second option, I got these glass beads, which are less exactly what I want for this cardigan, but they do lean in more to the whimsical element of this, and I think having a whole bunch of different buttons that are the right size and the right color, but every single one of them is different, could also be really fun. I don't think I'm going to be wearing this to the office anyway, so having glass buttons that are kind of crazy would still sort of fit the vibe of the garment. But either way, I have 2 options and I have time to choose which one I want later. And my last fitted whip is just another self-striping sock in a color by Laura of Tiny Human Knits. This is going to be a Christmassy sock. It's the colorway Jolly Holiday, and I cast this on December 1st to have something festive for myself going on. I do not anticipate having the time to get a lot of this done at all before Christmas, but I just liked the idea of it. I have been admiring Laura's Christmas colorways for so long, and while I was doing the order for my other self-striping socks from her, she did a Christmas in July release, and I could not help but snatch one of them up. I think this is a really great colorway that feels vintage Christmas. It's kind of hard to see because I have this wrapped up, but is not so Christmassy that I would be identifiably wearing a Christmas sock every other point in the year. I would know when I'm wearing them in December that I'm wearing a Christmas sock. And I cast these on so that I could feel in the holiday spirit, in the festive mood, but realistically, I'm not going to be able to get these done anywhere close to Christmas, and it was just nice to have a moment to cast something on for myself for a little bit. I think next I'm going to show you my spinning because it feels more closely related to knitting. I have finished 2 spinning projects. The first is this. This is some 100% Targi wool in the colorway Biblically Accurate Barbie by B of the Maker Bee podcast. I purchased it last year and it has been sitting waiting for some attention since then. I really like it, and what's, I guess, new for me is that I spun these on a wheel. I did not purchase a wheel. I am very lucky that I live in a city with a spinning guild and they rent out equipment. So a little while ago, I attended their wheel workshop, which was a 1-day class that they offer usually about twice a year to learn how to spin on a wheel. They also have a drop spinning class and then a couple more advanced ones on how to gain control and stuff like that. But I had been eagerly anticipating attending this wheel spinning workshop. I made other plans around it. And I made this tiny little guy to practice. While I was there, I had so much fun. I found it to be really, really useful. I learned a lot, and then I was able to rent a wheel without having to pay hundreds, if not thousands of dollars for one while I was still figuring out if this is something that I really want to pursue. And so I have rented an Ashford Kiwi 3. I have it for another, I think, 2.5 months. It's $20 a month to rent, and I spun up this braid. And it's all sorts of pinks. It is very thick and thin. It's not super consistent. It's not super even, but it's soft and it's fluffy, and it was great to do. I kept wanting to just go back to the wheel and do a little bit more, and it's super springy. I had never spun Targi before, and I found the fiber to be quite crimpy in a way that made it really elastic, and so I was learning both how to use a wheel properly and also how to use this. Another thing I appreciated about the class that I took is I started on an Ashford traditional wheel. However, I didn't like it very much, and our instructor encouraged us. We were all working on different wheels. You were also encouraged to bring your own wheel if you had purchased one already, but for the rest of us that were there using the guild's wheels, we were encouraged to try each other's wheels to see which one works, because our instructor kept saying there's not good wheels and bad wheels. It's more that some people have wheels that they swear by and other people have wheels that they swear at, and it's all going to be completely different based on your own personal preferences. And I find that I love the Kiwi 3. I really like having the 2 treadles as opposed to the 1, and there's just something about it that really works for me. So that's been really great. So I did this and I'm really happy about it. The only thing is I don't have a lot of yardage. I was hoping to make a hat out of this. I thought that would be just so fun. I have really been leaning into eclectic accessories. I have just been enjoying color, enjoying whimsy, enjoying brights for winter. I don't think I have enough, according to my Nitty Naughty, if I counted correctly. I spun this thicker than I was expecting, especially since the Targi, after wetting and whacking it, really sprung up and shrunk down. And that's, I think, really nice from a wearability perspective, but this is either going to have to be a fingerless mitten or a contrast in something else. So maybe I'll do a diamond pattern like I did for my cardigan, but on a hat, and use this as the contrast instead. But yeah, this is my first and much better spinning finished object. And let me tell you, it's a lot of fun to make yarn. But this second spinning whip was a lot less fun, and it's entirely my own fault. So like I said, I have rented a wheel. I have been enjoying the wheel. I like using it. It makes me feel like a character from a nursery rhyme in a way that soothes me somehow. And it's just a really tactile experience. It's really good for me. However, that doesn't mean that there are not moments where I want to tear my hair out. I started spinning this braid that I got from Fleece Artist last year. It is merino, and I think it was 100 grams, maybe 50, but I think 100. I didn't know enough when I bought it to tell that the fiber was felted, and I spun the first half of that braid on my drop spindle, and it was a brutal experience. I think in one of my videos from last year, I demonstrated how hard it was to just draft it all. I was yanking with all of my strength to kind of get these fibers to separate. And I know now that there are ways of I think, carding wool to kind of fix that, but I didn't have access to a drum carder at the time, and I don't have the expertise really to fix these sorts of things. So I just powered through and had a bad time, and then I just put that whole thing in the naughty corner for a year. Then I got the wheel and I thought, it's so much faster. I can just finish up the second half of that braid. I'm trying to spin it super thick anyway because of the yarn I'm trying to achieve for the project I want to make it with, and I'll get it done. And I did. It was still really an uphill battle to draft and get this done quickly, but because it was felted, it lent itself better to being a thicker yarn, and I got it done fast. And then I went to ply. And when you're spinning, if you're not aware, if you're doing a 2-ply, which is the only thing I know how to do at this point, you first make the 2 plies, you spin them in the same direction, and then to ply them together, you spin them together in the opposite direction, and then ideally it balances in the twist in the middle and you get yarn. I spun my first single on my drop spindle one direction. I spun the second half using the wheel in the other direction. And so in plying, one of them was coming undone and becoming light and fluffy, and the other was becoming very, very ropey. Through this experience, I think I stumbled upon one of the ways that you make a certain type of art yarn, but more than that, I ended up with just really weird yarn. And I think you can see, if you look, you can see that half of it is like really tight and half of it is quite fluffy. I also kept tangling things up and attempting to do this, so I have 4 or 5 separate balls or skeins of this, and like, that's fine, but I really think I learned my lesson there, and I didn't want to stop. I didn't want to waste it. This had already been sitting in my closet, that one specifically, for a year. What else am I going to do with this material? And I'm using this for a balaclava anyway, so the fact that it looks kind of funky really contributes to the look I'm going for, which is a really funky accessory. I'm going to be a grown adult woman wearing a balaclava with bear ears. Like, come on, it's okay that the texture is more visible than it otherwise would have been. But it was still a very frustrating experience that I soldiered through out of spite, really, and stubbornness. So I have a whole bunch of these individual guys. I also don't know if I have enough. I think I tend to spin a bit thicker than I think I am at the time. But I have another yarn that I'm going to hold double. It's actually the same yarn in a different color that I used for this. I think that this is going to be a pretty extreme game of yarn chicken because I really don't have a lot, but it's one that I'm eager to play. So that's my spinning tale of woe. And that brings us to sewing. My sewing finished object to show you today is a mock neck top. This is it. And this is the turtle / mock neck pattern by Kiana Bonollo, which is, to my understanding, a very common beginner project for stretch fabrics or knit fabrics, which is what this is. I am using terms quite hesitantly. If I'm using the wrong word, please let me know in the comments. I don't want to be wrong. I'm just very much beginner, and pretty much everything in this section, if you couldn't also already tell from the spinning section, has the major caveat that I'm a beginner. But I made this, and I am, for the most part, quite proud of myself and quite pleased with it. I have been wearing it, and when I wear it, I get compliments, and I don't mean compliments where I say, "Do you like my top? I just made it." And people say, "Oh my God, that's so nice for something that you made." I mean that I will be wearing this top and people will say, "Nice top," and then I get to say, "Thanks, I made it." That said, I still do feel that this is rife with beginners' mistakes. First of all, it took me forever to figure out how to set up my machine to knit stretch fabrics. I got a special foot and I got jersey needles. Those two things carry this whole project on their back. But it took me more time to set up the machine and find the right thread, stitch tension and length and width that worked with the zigzag function than it did to actually sew these pieces together, because there's only 4 pattern pieces and it's pretty straightforward. I also find that at this point in time, it feels that my biggest challenge as a beginner sewist, person who sews, is I do not have the instincts or the muscle memory or the experience to understand the order of operations in sewing, the way that I now have come to rely on in my knitting projects. For example, do I press my seams open or do I press them to one side? This pattern didn't specify, and I spent a lot of time worrying about that. Or in the pajamas that I made earlier this year, the pattern would often say to like serge or zigzag and then sew things together. But where, and then trim the seam allowance. Where do I zigzag in the seam allowance if I'm going to trim it afterwards? Also, why am I not sewing and then zigzagging and then trimming? A lot of those things don't make sense to me, and I wish that they did. And I think something in the new year that I want to explore is taking a sewing class where I'm working on like a particular item that I would like, but I get to learn from an actual experienced person what the order of operations is and why I'm doing certain things, so I can start to apply them myself, because I want to build good habits. I want to know from the beginning what is the correct thing to be doing, but I feel like I lack that a lot in my sewing. So for this, this pattern was super clear, and I think good for beginners in that it doesn't tell you have to press or do anything fancy. But that's kind of the instruction that I want as a beginner, and I want my hand to be held at every point so I understand with time why we're doing certain things. So that left me scrambling a little bit. That said, I love this, and I have cut out the pieces for one more, and I actually have a second as a whip that I'm going to show you in a bit. But in terms of mistakes, you'll see here that on the collar, where I joined the collar to the bodice, it's twisted right here. I did the exact same thing on the other side because I didn't know which way to put my seam allowance. And because it's done on either side, I don't really mind, because then it just seems like an intentional design choice. But that is something that I noticed afterwards and thought, oops. I also chose the wrong size for my waist. It fits well in the bust and in the shoulders and in the arms, but I tried on the bodice after I put the two pieces together, and it fit and was comfortable in my waist, but it looked a little bit too stretched. I felt a little bit too like a sausage being cased. That was a little sad for me, because I thought, well, once you can uncut, my options are cut out new bodice pieces at the next size up, or I guess just have this be the garment. Then I realized this is designed with 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I just unpicked the side seams because I hadn't trimmed them yet, and then sewed it together with much less seam allowance and got about, I don't know, 1/4 inch or about 1/2 centimeter back, and now it fits perfectly, and it's so comfortable. And it was comfortable before because this is a stretch fabric that I got from Fabrications here in Ottawa on sale, and it was nice to be able to have that, to just take it out a little bit more. And so I now have the wiggle room to gain a little bit of weight, be a little bloated after dinner or something, and I have that built into the garment to kind of work with me. And to really hit home that despite what I said about wishing there was a little bit more detailed instruction in this pattern, I'm still making a second one. And so this is my second one. I have hemmed the sleeves, but not the body. And I'm really considering redoing the collar. So this is a fabric that I got on clearance at Joann's in the US when I was visiting my father there last month, which might seem like a strange thing to go to a big chain store while I was in the US, but there was a Joann's a couple towns away from where my dad lives, and there were no other sewing stores, and it's really hard to get to the big chain fabric stores where I live without a car. And also in Ontario where I live, I find the Fabricland options to just not be so great compared to Joann's, which maybe puts things into perspective, just really how not so great they are. But I wanted to check out Joann's, especially since they had a sale on, and that it was a little bit easier to shop there for me because I told myself prioritize non-synthetics and get things that you can make another one of these mock neck tops in. And so I did. I got one nice thick cotton spandex rib in a black, which I think will be a great basic, and I have the pattern pieces cut out for. And then I got this checkered rayon spandex in this sort of periwinkle color, which I think brings out my eyes. And this is much drapier and a thinner fabric than the other one, so I cut out the bodice bigger. Like I added an extra centimeter as I was cutting out the bodice, especially in the waist, because in my experience, just owning clothing and paying attention to what lasts and what doesn't, this sort of heavy, stretchy, drapey, thin fabric shows underwear lines a lot more obviously than other fabrics. And, oh, we're so losing the light. And also gets holes in the dryer a lot faster if it's something that receives a lot of strain. So to avoid those two things, I just wanted to make the bodice bigger, especially having learned from the first ones I made that pattern pieces that I have need to be a bit bigger in the waist. And that, I think, was very much the right decision, because when I try this on, it fits perfectly and looks like the other one I made, which makes me think that if I had just cut out the pattern pieces in this fabric as is, it would have been way too tight. And the thing is I accidentally sewed the collar at a bigger seam allowance than I was expecting. And I did a good job, which is why I'm sad about probably having to unpick it. But it's more of a crew neck than it is a mock neck. And I think I want the collar to be taller. I put a poll up on my Instagram, and the vast majority of people said to keep it. I think it was about a 75-25 split between keep it like this and make it longer. But I don't know. My roommate and my mom also said to keep it as is and that it looks good. And I know that part of the reason why it's currently sitting weird is that I haven't trimmed the seam allowance, which is really just like flipping up and boxy and annoying. But I like a mock neck, and I like the idea of this checkered print sticking out underneath my wintry sweaters. I just think that that would be really cute, and then I lose that if I keep it as a crew neck. But so far, this has been good. I just need to spend like an hour and hem it. I also have to redo the neck regardless, because I found this fabric to be just a little bit harder to sew, and there is a place where the stitches have already come loose. You can see here, the stitches have already started to come loose, so I need to adjust my machine and redo it. And if I'm going to redo it, I'm kind of wondering if I should just make it a mock neck like I want it to be. But then I don't have it as the exact size of the checks, one row of them, the way that I like. I got this fabric 60% off, which was really nice. I understand that Joann runs sales quite frequently, the same way that Michaels does here in Canada and in the US. But I got this 60% off, which was such a huge win. And I like this because it feels like it gives me the opportunity to participate in the checker trend, but in a way that's not going to feel dated in a couple years, and in a way that works with my wardrobe and what I like to wear. And I find I am falling prey to the exact same issue that I had as a beginner knitter right now as a beginner sewist, which is I want the shiny things. I struggle so much to rein in myself when I'm going fabric shopping and not going for really bright colors and bold prints, because I think it would be really fun to play with and sew and look at, even though if I was shopping for already prepared clothing, I would not probably gravitate towards those things. So this felt like a good happy medium. I mean, I think you can tell that from this too. Like, this works in my wardrobe. I chose it very consciously and I like it and I wear it a lot, but I find that the more I make my own clothing, the more my fashion and my outfits become bolder and more colorful. And I don't think that's a problem, but I do think that is because that's the stuff I like to work with. Last and also certainly least, we have acquisitions. Like I said, I went to Joann's when I was in the States. It was a little bit of retail therapy because I was there the week after the election, and I don't know, I think I was naive, but I didn't expect it to go the way that it did. And then I was quite emotional having to go. I mean, it was wonderful spending time with my father, don't get me wrong, but it was just, I don't know. I'm also American, in case you were unaware. My father is American. I lived there for the first 10 years of my life. I was born there, as much as I go on about being Canadian. But I don't know, I had a lot of feelings. So I went to Joann's and spent money. I also got this fabric. This is 100% polyester, and when you feel it, you can feel it. But I couldn't resist. It's so pretty. It feels very neat. It is a green background and these pretty florals that are kind of small, and I like it a lot. I got 4 yards because it was also on sale and very inexpensive to begin with, and I hope to, as I get better at sewing, make a dress out of this and line it with cotton or a more breathable fabric, because I think this is going to be gorgeous and I think it could be fun for like next year's festive activities. But I am definitely not good enough to sew with that sort of satin finish yet, nor to make the kind of dress that I would like. And so that's just really to add to my stash as something fun to work on later. At this point in time, I really don't need to buy any more fabric. I have all my thrifted bed sheets, which are my priority to make after I finish this mock neck, and I have this now. And I feel like I have all that I need as a beginner that is appropriate in terms of materials and stuff that I would actually wear. But it was still fun to get a little inexpensive thing for myself. Other things that I got at the Ottawa Valley Weavers and Spinners annual sale and exhibition, which is an event that I look forward to every year, and I went with 2 friends and it was fun. I got a couple braids. This one is 50 grams of Punta Arenas. It's combed top and it's hand-dyed in this pretty sort of slate blue. I've never used this type of fiber. I like it. I think it would be very easy to incorporate in color work, which is something that I knit a lot of anyway. And then it was also pretty inexpensive, and I got this from Moppy Creations, which I remember getting the braids that I bought at the same sale last year from too, so clearly I'm a Moppy Creations fan. And then I got this wad of fluff from, I don't remember the vendor. They didn't have cards or tags, and this was just in a big bin, and I grabbed it and I thought that's going to be nice. And this is super wash merino, and it was $5. I think it's 30 grams. And I got this because I was told that spinning superwash creates a very even yarn. I want to see if that's true while I have the wheel. And because I think it would create a wider range of applications for handspun for me if I could use superwash, because a lot of the people in my life have very sensitive skin, as I've already mentioned, and if I want to spin yarn that I can use to make things for the people in my life, then I think I might have to start looking at superwash from time to time. So this is my little attempt to find out, and again, it was only $5, so I don't feel that that was particularly egregious. And those are my acquisitions, plus the buttons. That's all I have for you guys today. This is kind of a long one, but I feel good. I hope it was fun. If you've made it this far, please let me know what you're working on right now. And thanks for watching, and happy knitting. We'll talk again soon.